Welcome to UTME Biology class on Top Scores e-learning. I am Chidima, your biology tutor. Today's class will be looking at the topic characteristics of living things. And the aim of this topic is to ensure that learners are able to distinguish between the various characteristics of living things. Then the second aim is to make sure that learners are able to define the cell, list the various components of a cell, differentiate between plant and animal cells. And the third one is to ensure that learners are able to identify and explain the organization of life, the levels of organization of life. The first objective is to make sure that learners are able to get the characteristics of living things and differentiate each of them. The second one is ability to define the cell, the various cell components and their functions. Then the third one is ability to explain the levels of organization of life. So we will move on to the first part, which is the characteristics of living things. And we have various characteristics of living things, and the first one is movement. Now when we talk about movement is simply defined as the ability of an organism to move its own body, a whole of it or part of it, from place to place. And organisms move for different reasons. They could move for food, for reproduction, or to run away from danger. So the first characteristic of living things we'll be looking at is movement, and it has to do with moving from one place to the another. Another name for movement is locomotion. You could either say movement or locomotion, they mean the same thing. The next one we'll be looking at is nutrition. Nutrition is another characteristic of living things, which is defined as the ability of living organisms to feed. Living organisms feed. Now we have two types of nutrition. We have the heterotrophic nutrition and the autotrophic nutrition. So organisms that are able to manufacture their own food are known as autotrophs, or they exhibit autotrophic nutrition, whereas those who are not able to manufacture their own food exhibit the heterotrophic nutrition. Then the next characteristic of living things we'll be looking at is respiration. When we talk about respiration is simply defined as the exchange of gases between organisms and their environment. So living organisms exchange gases between their environment and their body in order to stay alive. And the purpose of this respiration is to break down food substances, to oxidize them so that energy can be produced for various life processes. The next one is excretion. Now excretion is defined as the removal of metabolic waste products from the body. So living organisms get rid of various waste products from their body through different means. The next characteristics of living things we'll be looking at is irritability or sensitivity. Now this simply means the ability of organisms to respond to stimuli in their external and internal environment. Organisms have the ability to respond to various stimuli, either externally or internally, and these stimuli could include light, water, pain, and the rest of them. Then we also look at growth. Growth is also a characteristic of living things and is defined as an irreversible increase in size. Living organisms grow, both plants and animals, they grow, but their growth is different, as we will see later. Then another characteristic of living things we'll look at is reproduction. Reproduction is defined as the ability of living organisms to give birth to young ones or offspring. It enables life to be passed on from generation to generation. So living organisms produce after their own kind. The next one is adaptation. Living organisms adapt. Adaptation is the way living organisms get used to their various environments so that they could be comfortable and survive. So living organisms have this adaptation ability, which helps them to get used to their environment, to get comfortable with their environment and survive. Then the next characteristic of living things we'll look at is competition. Living organisms have the ability to struggle for the necessities of life in order to survive. We find out that in some environments there are scarce resources, so living organisms have the ability to compete, to struggle for these necessities of life in order to survive. Then the last one we'll be looking at is death. All living things must die. Why? Because there's a particular lifespan, there's a limited period of existence for all living things. Now I'll take a rundown of the characteristics of living things. Mentioned movement. Movement is also known as locomotion. Looked at nutrition. Remember, we have two types, the autotrophic and the heterotrophic. We mentioned respiration, excretion, irritability or sensitivity, growth, reproduction, adaptation, competition, and death. Now, living organisms, they have, or there are differences in their characteristics. So you find out that the way plants move is different from the way animals move. The way plants grow is different from the way animals grow. And we also possess some features that animals don't possess. The way we respond to stimuli is different from the way plants respond to stimuli. So the next part we'll be looking at is simply the cell. And the cell is defined as the basic structural and functional unit of life. A cell is defined as the basic structural and functional unit of life of all living organisms. Now, plants and animals have cells. And their cells are different. They're made up of different materials or organelles, but they have some similarities. So we'll be looking at the various cell components and their functions. Now we'll start with the nucleus. The function of the nucleus. This nucleus is present in both plant and animal cells. The nucleus is present in both plants and animal cells. Now, the nucleus controls all life activities of the cells. It controls the life activities of the cell, and it also stores hereditary information. And it contains the DNA. It controls all life activities of the cell, and it contains the DNA. That's why it stores hereditary information. Then another cell organelle we'll be looking at is the chromosomes. These chromosomes contain the DNA, which store the genetic traits. The chromosomes contain the DNA, which stores genetic traits. Then moving on to another cell organelle we'll be looking at is the mitochondria. This is also known as the powerhouse of the cell. Is commonly referred to as the powerhouse of the cell. And the sites of respiration. These mitochondria are the sites of respiration. They're described as the powerhouse of the cell. Remember, I mentioned the nucleus controls all life activities of the cell. It also stores hereditary information. The chromosome contains the DNA, which stores genetic traits, and the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, is the site of respiration.